You're listening to a podcast by Way Collective, a contemplative community for love and liberation in Santa Barbara, California. This recording was the conversation starter at our Dinner and Dialogue gathering on August 13th, 2025. Thanks for tuning in.
So before we begin our talk on mindfulness as a contemplative practice and finding presence in everyday moments, I wanted to share a poem tonight by Dana Fowles called Walk Slowly. It only takes a reminder to breathe, a moment to be still, and just like that, something in me settles, softens, makes space for imperfection. The harsh voice of judgment drops to a whisper, and I remember again that life isn't a relay race, that we will all cross the finish line, that waking up to life is what we were born for. As many times as I forget, catch myself charging forward without even knowing where I'm going, that many times I can make the choice to stop, to breathe, to be, and walk slowly into the mystery. I really feel like this poem holds the essence of what mindfulness practice is and the choice that we can make to return to the present moment. And I love that line, as many times as I forget, catch myself charging forward without even knowing where I'm going. Because I've been there and I don't know if you can relate. But I actually remember a time when I was running errands downtown and I jumped into the car to go home and I was completely distracted, completely on autopilot, and ended up back in the driveway. And I really couldn't remember having made the trip, actually doing the driving to get home. And it was really scary. And I realized, oh my gosh, I was so distracted. And we're often not in the present moment. We're often thinking about the past or thinking about the future. We're on autopilot, and mindfulness is the opposite of that. Mindfulness is bringing your mind where your body is, because your body's always in the present moment, but the mind is often somewhere else. So tonight we're going to talk about what mindfulness is, why it's good for our mind and body, and how it can be a beautiful contemplative practice. So let's start off with what it is, a definition. And this is from Jon Kabat-Zinn, who created the mindfulness-based stress reduction program. And he's actually really the founder or the father, if you will, of the modern mindfulness movement in the West. He says, mindfulness is the awareness that arises from paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally, with curiosity and kindness. He teaches us that mindfulness is something that we can come back to throughout our day in whatever activities we're doing, and noticing that when we're distracted and then coming back to the present moment. In ancient wisdom traditions like Buddhism, mindfulness wasn't separate from daily life. Yes, it was definitely cultivated through formal meditation practices like sitting in silence and focusing on the breath, but it was also carried into everyday activities like walking, eating, working, and even washing the dishes. And this way of being wasn't unique to Buddhism. In the Christian contemplative tradition, mystics like Brother Lawrence, Teresa of Avila, and Julian of Norwich also practiced a form of mindfulness. Of course, they didn't call it mindfulness then, but they were staying present with the mind and the body and the heart with the intention of bringing love, compassion, and attentiveness to each moment. Whether through prayer, or silence, or mindful work, their aim was the same, to meet the present moment with openness and with care. And I want to reassure you that mindfulness isn't something extra that you have to add to your day, not something to put on your to-do list to check off in our already busy lives. It's really just a way of being in your life. Any time that we show up with intention and full presence without being pulled into distraction, we're practicing mindfulness. Or any time we notice we are distracted and come back to the present moment, that's mindfulness. And it can be while we're cooking or doing the dishes or creating art or exercising, swimming, playing music, even singing. All of these everyday tasks, activities can be done with mindful awareness. Going back to Jon Kabat-Zinn, he's now in his early 80s, and he's actually been teaching about mindfulness for many, many decades. And he's used the concepts of mindfulness and meditation from the Buddhist tradition, but his teachings offer us a completely secular way to practice. His studies confirm and show us that mindfulness supports both mental and physical well-being. So that's why mindfulness is good for our minds and our bodies. And it's one of the wonderful things about how research and science has now caught up with the ancient wisdom that they knew already, but now we can prove through our research that these practices are good for us. And we now know, we can now prove, that mindfulness lowers blood pressure and it lowers cholesterol. It also lowers cortisol, which is one of the main stress hormones in our bodies. It strengthens our immune system, it can improve our emotional regulation, and it also helps with emotional balance, and it helps us to build resilience so we can face life's challenges on a daily basis with more clarity and compassion. Even a few minutes of daily practice can begin to shift how we meet life's challenges. And speaking of life's challenges, at the Way Collective, we talk about living a contemplative life where presence, reflection, and compassion shapes how we move through the world and shapes how we meet life's challenges. The practice of mindfulness can support the contemplative life by helping us to create a space or a pause, a way to see things more clearly and respond with care, so we're not so reactive in our daily lives. A few weeks ago, Tim talked about non-duality and non-violence, and he quoted the Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl. And I'd like to use that quote again here because it's a great example of mindfulness. Between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. So mindfulness and practicing mindfulness, coming back to the present moment, really can help us find that space, that pause. And it's that pause that helps us to meet our life with curiosity, compassion, and connection. And a call back to the mystic Brother Lawrence. He famously wrote that he could feel as close to the divine in the clatter of his kitchen, cooking and washing the dishes, as in the quiet of his chapel. And he reminds us that everyday tasks can be sacred when we approach them with mindful awareness. There's a modern day mystic that also reminds us of the practice of washing the dishes, and that's Thich Nhat Hanh. He was a Vietnamese Zen Buddhist monk, a peace activist, and he wrote about, and many books, wrote about mindfulness and meditation, and he wrote about washing the dishes, and it meant a lot to me in my early 20s when I read about the practice of mindfulness and just doing one thing at a time, just trying to be fully present with whatever you're doing. And I remember it had an impact on me because that was the early days of the idea of multitasking, and that the more you could multitask, the more successful you would be. And the idea of taking your time doing one thing at a time was just really not very cool. And so reading about this practice of mindfulness was such a revelation and a relief. And I really felt like I was being given permission to just slow down and stop multitasking. And I love this quote by Thich Nhat Hanh. He says, "The present moment is filled with joy and happiness. If you are attentive, you will see it." And he did not mean this to be Pollyannish or tone deaf to the suffering in the world. His teachings on joy were never about denying pain. They were always about holding joy and suffering together, both at the same time, recognizing that noticing beauty and connection and moments of joy is not an escape, but it's a source of strength for facing life's hardships with compassion and courage. Again, that non-duality, holding both at the same time. And the beautiful thing is, you don't have to be in a monastery or on a meditation cushion to live this way. Mindfulness can be woven into whatever you're doing. Walking, gardening, painting, even lifting weights. Anytime you bring your full attention and your heart to the moment, you're practicing mindfulness. So what might this practice look like in everyday life? Here's an invitation. Try taking a few long, slow breaths before going in to have a difficult conversation or before answering an email. Or perhaps feeling your feet on the ground, noticing the weight of your body, the solidity of your body, feeling grounded by the earth, or even slowing down your walking. You could also check in with your breath between tasks and just taking a moment of quiet. And this is the heart really of living a contemplative life, not escaping the world, but engaging from a quieter, steadier center. And mindfulness gives us the tools to live this way, turning even the most ordinary moments into opportunities for connection, compassion, and presence. So in discussing mindfulness as a contemplative practice, we have our 3 questions: our self, our sacred, and our society, questions for dialogue. And starting with the self, in your day-to-day life, what helps you return to the moment when you're feeling distracted or overwhelmed? And how does curiosity show up for you around the topic of mindfulness as a contemplative practice? And the sacred question, how do you experience the idea that the ordinary can be just as spiritual or sacred as a formal practice? And where do you notice moments of connection, even in ordinary activities? And is there a person, a place, or a ritual in your life that naturally draws you into a sense of presence? And for the society question, how might practicing mindfulness in our own lives shape the way we respond to injustice, conflict, or suffering in the wider world? And what would it look like for mindfulness to guide how we listen to others, especially those with different experiences or perspectives? How can small acts of mindful awareness ripple outward into our communities?
Thanks for listening to this podcast by Way Collective. To keep up with our community, you can subscribe to this podcast, go to www.waycollective.org, or follow us on Instagram at @waycollective. Peace and every good, y'all.